Afternoon. Welcome to the College of Law Practice Management's Futures Forum. This afternoon, you're joining us for Together Again, Returning to the Office or Reimagining Working Remotely. I'm Natalie Kelly, a fellow and trustee of the college and a part of the content committee. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this afternoon's program, and I'd like to remind each of you that this program is being recorded. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to our moderator for the program, Mr. Ari Kaplan. Ari is a fellow in the college as well as a colleague. He is renowned for helping us in the industry with all things legal and in this particular instance helping us learn more about how we can operate post-pandemic or almost post-pandemic. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ari to introduce the remainder of the panel.
Hi, everyone. This is especially fun for me when I get to do a College of Law Practice Management event. So Natalie, Debbie, thanks for this particular honor. I have been hosting, as some of you know, Suzanne certainly knows, a Zoom call every single weekday, basically since the pandemic started. So today it's called the virtual lunch, and today was virtual lunch number 351. So I've come at this. We've had lots of conversations about this topic. I'm very excited, and I just want to quickly introduce our panelists today. So Barbara Dunn, who's a fellow, is a principal at Gensler. Maureen Harms is the Associate General Counsel and Managing Counsel at 3M. And Suzanne Schwartz is a Senior Office Administrator and Paralegal Coordinator for Ogletree Deakins in Milwaukee. Welcome. Uh-oh. Can you guys hear me?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, great. So I thought we would start, and I see a lot of folks on. I know this isn't a shy community, so feel free to ask us questions, jump in. I'm excited about this. I see it as sort of a formal, kind of informal discussion. Suzanne, I would love to start with you, and just to kind of set the foundation here in turn, because I know that you have been. I've always been fascinated by this. You've been in your office since the early days. Sometimes you were the only person in that office. Ogletree is very lucky to have you. How do we convince people to return to their offices?
You know, it's really not that bad. You know, I mean, yeah, I literally have been here all the time. You know, as a firm, our culture is such that we are better collaborating and working together in person. It's just how we've always been. It's how we work. And people have missed that. They expressed it continually during the pandemic when a lot of people were remote. And it's like, I can't wait till we can work together in person again. So fortunately, our office especially didn't need a lot of convincing to come back. But of course, you need to make people feel comfortable coming back and make them feel welcome. So having top leadership in the office is definitely essential to set the stage for people to come back. You can't tell people to come back if your leadership isn't there. That sends kind of a mixed message. So we do that. You have to address some safety concerns as well, and concerns employees may have about coming back. You want to make sure you have your office space set up and that you have appropriate spacing. Everything's been cleaned. We did a very deep clean before people started coming back. And have your protocols and policies for sanitation, vaccinations, masking. As well, everyone's got a little bit different philosophy on some things, and while you have policies, you also want to have an atmosphere where you're not making any judgments if somebody still feels they need to wear a mask for personal reasons, whatever they may be, even if they are amongst other people who are vaccinated. And have a plan, maybe a gradual return where you phase people in so it isn't just everybody running back all at once. And also be open to offering some flexibility for remote work opportunities, you know, based on the position and needs of the firm or the business.
Oh,
I got it, I know. Can I just get a show of hands? I'm just curious, if you use the reaction emoji or whatever, I'm just curious, how many people are back in their office? If there's an office to go to, how many people are back? Just curious. Just put up your a thumb, whatever. Okay, so 1, 2, let's say not only, wow, very small handful. Maureen, does that surprise you? Does well, I guess there are more now. People are realizing that they should do it. So does it surprise, there seem to be limited thumbs ups and hands up. I mean, does that surprise you?
No, it doesn't surprise me, and maybe it makes me feel good. I see the success we've had working from home as a real positive. I think, 3M has obviously had a unique challenge in this pandemic, and many of our people in the manufacturing and R&D organization have been working in the office for the entirety of the pandemic. But the legal department is almost entirely remote. We have over 500 people in our organization globally, and I think we have, in the US, we have 10 people in the office. In some of the countries that have returned, there are more people. But in general, we have done so well and enjoyed so much the, I'll call it equity, that we found working remotely with everybody having the same size square and no side conversations for those people outside of our headquarters to try to understand as we talked in the conference room pre-pandemic. So we've really, I think, seen the best of what could have been much more difficult for us, given that we weren't using Teams before March of 2020, and our Skype use was pretty basic, primitive maybe even. So we've come a long way pretty fast, and we think we can continue the momentum and make a lot more transformations for our department.
Barbara, given your work, I find it fascinating that we have, some organizations are back, some organizations finding tremendous success not being back, and it being seamless in many respects. Do you think this combination, a hybrid, is sustainable long term?
Yeah, I think fully remote, probably not, but a hybrid model I think is sustainable. And, we've seen that lawyers have been able to successfully work from home all this time. And I think mobility is here to stay, and it's going to need to be part of real estate strategies going forward. Every firm we're working with now, whether it be a small boutique firm or global firms, they're all exploring what remote work looks like, or hoteling, some kind of hybrid combination. And firms that have leases coming up are really looking at their entire occupancy strategy and trying to figure out new smart ways to be working. In addition to that, there's a big spectrum in what we're seeing. I read recently Baker McKenzie set, I think September 1st, to come back to the office, and they're recognizing that they need to offer some more flexibility, but they are also saying that in-person interactions are really key to the firm's success. And you might recall Freshfields, I think it was last August, implemented, they call it an office release plan, where if you're not going to be in the office, your office is fair game and somebody can reserve it to use that space. And and the interesting thing to me too is that I think one of the unforeseen upsides of all this remote work, and I'm hearing this from different kinds of industries, but it's really opened up access to a lot of new talent. And there's one example of a financial firm I know who everyone the manager has hired has been out of town because he can't find the talent he needs locally. And that whole team is being set up as a virtual team. And I think there's going to be something to be said for if firms are not willing to kind of meet talent halfway and figure out a way to do more hybrid work models. There might be,
issues around being competitive in the recruiting market.
I would love to try this again and see if people think that this hybrid is sustainable long term, whether it's partially in, partially out. I know that Paul put a comment about how you define back. I don't know, Paul. I think that a lot of people are trying to define this. So I'd love to see show of hands or something. Do you think it's sustainable, a kind of a midpoint, or does it have to be all one or the other? Any thoughts there? Awesome. Let's see here. Joan, thank you for voting. All right, this is great. Cool. So let's think about this for a second. Maureen, how do you combine this? So you mentioned about 10 people in the office, hundreds of people not. Is there a way, like a best practice for opportunities in the office, opportunities to work from home? A lot of our discussions on the virtual lunch, frankly, have been about this find ways to create human connection periodically, and the rest of the time people are still at home, especially when you're working with a global workforce where the pandemic is in different stages in different communities.
It's a loaded question. Opportunities inside and outside to try to keep the collaboration, create opportunities. I think one of the things we are seeing is, to the remote talent point, we have over the last 18 months hired a number of people who have never been in our headquarters, who are working at pretty senior levels and working very effectively. And just recently, we agreed to hire someone who will be permanently remote in another state, which we've never done. So it creates talent opportunities, but it also creates opportunities for career development within our organization. So we have very talented lawyers in other parts of the world who would never have thought that they would have a shot at one of the roles in our headquarters. And now when we look at hybrid work and remote work, that is a much more realistic option for them. So that's just a simple example of opportunities. I think for people at all levels of the organization who have families, who have unique personal commitments, we're finding people can work at different hours and it's successful. You can take 2 hours off in the middle of the day and you can go and take care of your mom's shopping needs or whatever it might be, and it's fine. It doesn't get in the way of working. I think too, with a global organization and meetings at different times of the morning or the evening, not having to drive in, not having the expectation that you show up in the office to start that meeting, that creates a lot of flexibility for people. And it allows us to more easily go on somebody else's time. 6 a.m. meeting that helps the Asia organization might have been really, really challenging before. And now I think you'd find people are very happy to do it. So lots of opportunity. If that's the real theme, opportunity, I think there is many, many opportunities that we haven't thought of before.
Suzanne, you're the paralegal coordinator for Ogletree Deakins in Milwaukee and operating, managing the office. Are there certain roles that are just better suited to working remotely than others?
Definitely. Certainly attorneys and to a certain extent paralegals are a little bit more suited to that. And attorneys have actually a lot of ours have always worked remotely when they're traveling, and they're on the road a lot and working either from a plane, a hotel room, or somewhere else. Paralegals, we have found, can function very well that way, as well. And in fact, we are sometimes hiring some that will be a remote-based position because they're going to be supporting, say, several offices at a time. That could be not even geographically linked together. But there are functions that really do require an in-office presence. As much as some of the functions can be done remotely, I hate to say it, law firms still are pretty paper intensive. As much as everybody says they're going paperless, they're still paper. So we have, your PAs, your receptionists, now that we're back to getting more in-office meetings with either clients or mediations, depositions, things like that. But your IT support, your office clerks, and then anybody who manages those on-site type people. It's important that they be in office, as well. A back office function such as billing, yes, that can be done remotely also. but you've just found when I was here literally by myself many times, mail still happens, and mail is paper. It's, things still come from the post office, or you have to send things out Federal Express. That's paper. Now that we're back to doing trials and things again, attorneys want a trial binder. Well, it's kind of hard to put that together remotely, totally. Somebody can do a lot of the work remotely, but it still has to be printed out, punched, put into a binder, tabbed, etc. So there are certain functions that definitely require that in office, as well as closing out files as we try to go more paperless. We have old files. You still need a body. And my staff has actually said, I'm glad I'm back in the office because I could not get this stuff done when I'm at home. I've got 30 minutes or an hour of kind of downtime. I can go clear out this whole file drawer and close them and move them off site. So there's definitely some benefits.
So I want to get to Sharon's question, but before Sharon, and thank you for raising your hand. I think that's awesome. But before I do that, I just want to ask to follow up on this point. Is there then a distinction between how easily this can happen if you're in a law firm versus whether you're in a law department?
Yeah, Maureen's got a different, obviously perspective being on the in-house side, and we're on the client side trying to meet all the client needs. So, but I think definitely it depends on the level of the position and the type of the position. Again, certain functions are just like Maureen's company has the manufacturing. That can't be done remote. Those people have to be, in the factory, type settings. So it really does depend on the role and how you can make that work.
Maureen, are law departments somewhat more capable of maintaining a more remote environment?
Are law firms more capable of
law departments?
Law departments. Yeah, I don't know if in theory they should be. Maybe in practice they are. The point about creating litigation binders, we're probably not doing a whole lot of that. Our outside firms are doing a lot of that work. Having said that, I think that we had just rough guess 50% people working paper before they went remote. Now, I know there are a few people who have gone out and bought printers for themselves, but the rest of them, they're managing without print paper, and I'm one of them. And there's a few people maybe in the M&A group who might have to go into the office to just have the massive documents that you need to be referring it as part of the review there for them, but it's a very small percentage of people. So maybe our work is slightly different, but I think actually lawyers have some of the same issues and same work habits and maybe some of the same reluctance to change. And I think we're all being forced to. And in-house, the pressures, cost pressures and pressures to change the way we deliver legal services to be more efficient. It's in the spirit of what we've had to learn. And I think what we've proved to ourselves we can do during COVID. So we've got a lot of motivation to change.
All right,
I was going to say one technology we did implement was paperless billing. It was kind of in the works before COVID hit. And we still had a few attorneys say, hey, can you print out my paperless bills? I need to see them. But literally for the most part, every attorney here in the Milwaukee office has embraced it and actually loves it. It's a time saver. It's more efficient. And these are people that maybe didn't have the best tech skills, but they have learned and they love the paperless billing to edit their bills and turn them around. So it's been a plus.
So I want to turn to Sharon, and then I want to address Paul's question in the chat. But Sharon, you're on. Or we're waiting. This is like my Dora the Explorer moment. No question. She has her hand up, right? All right. Paul, great question here. Would love to address it with our panelists. We'll start with Barbara. Paul asked, do you feel that opportunities to work remotely must be consistent for all categories of employees? You could see it here. Or do we have some sort of divide?
I think consistency is really important. It's very hard to maintain and monitor a lot of variance for different people, and I could see it. I think the word resentment was used. I could see people feeling resentful about one type of role being handled one way versus another. I think it also, the parts that it's not just the job description of the role, I think, that needs to be thought of, but it's also, I think it needs to take into account people's personalities, and some people are just better suited to working remotely, and other people need kind of the energy of feeding off of each other. So I think we need to really accommodate a lot of different personalities and types, and ultimately it's about giving people choice.
Paul, did you have a follow-up there? I see you're up top.
Yeah, and this is what we're struggling with. We are a 100+ attorney firm with 5 different practice groups, and each of the practice groups has different levels and different types of support relationships between the attorneys and the LAAs or the paralegals. Some of the practice groups are still exceptionally paper-driven, although, like Suzanne, most of our people are doing electronic billing, which is great. But we still have courts in Massachusetts that do not do electronic billing, or electronic filing, rather. And so we're restricted to paper, and those staff need to be in the office to be able to support the attorneys.
Yep.
Our IP group can pretty much work remotely. Corporate group the same way. So it's different by practice group, and yet there is resentment that the attorneys don't want to be perceived as the bad guys by saying we need our LAAs to come in. So therefore we need to make the LAAs and other groups come in, even though they could do their jobs completely effectively remotely. So this is where the balance of finding equity, as Barbara was saying a couple of minutes ago, it's great to strive for equity throughout the firm, and yet at the same time we're trying to be respectful of the individual needs. And these days, from at least what we are saying, this has nothing to do with the pandemic anymore. This has nothing to do with security and wiping things down and safety. This has to do with work style. And it's a whole new gig that we are really struggling with how to do it fairly.
Maureen, you to address. Thanks again, Paul. That was great points. Maureen, you specifically mentioned that there's parity because everyone has the same box and the same kind of real estate. But clearly, there are folks that just can't work remotely or don't have the ability to make the choice.
The first is different than the latter. So. They don't have the ability, or they can't. Sorry, you said it doesn't work. There are people who don't have space in their house to have a quiet workstation, and they've been, they show themselves on their bed with their laptop, and the kids coming in, and we've all seen that. And there's something very charming actually about having the kids and the dogs, even if it's you that has it in the background. It's very human to see each other in these environments, and I think we are a lot more tolerant. But it doesn't work for everyone. And I think that's really important. Choice, individual choice, I think is a very important factor. We think it's really important that it's not the manager choosing for the individual employee, where the individual's ability to work from home is proven. And, it's not a preference or a style thing. It's another thing to have somebody who's a notary that you need to notarize the documents before they go out. That person, we got to manage somebody that's a notary is in the office whenever, normal working hours exist. So you have to look at those kinds of roles, but with a really open mind and a keen eye to what I would call is, strong personal preferences of leaders over others. And leaders have to walk the talk. If they're not working remotely, they don't know what it's like to work remote. They're not going to be very effective with the people who are working remote. So that's going to be another key is how do leaders show up?
One of the issues that has come up over 350 something virtual lunches is this idea of will we revert back to everything that was before? Or do we have this opportunity to reimagine what work looks like, what it looks like to be in the office together? You know, there's all this discussion about water cooler work. You know, I practiced for nearly 9 years. I don't really remember a moment where I was like walking in the hallway, other than being really nervous that someone would ask me if I was busy, and the answer was always yes, to get like amazing like knowledge and inspiration just dropped on me because I was getting a glass of water. It just always seems so ridiculous, yet everybody is yearning for this. So Suzanne, I want to start with you on this question. What can organizations do? You know, your team is back, people are with each other. Is there something different that's happening, or is there something that should be happening that we can do together that makes that time more valuable?
Getting back to your first point is I was just talking to an attorney before this webinar started about that very issue, about being able to mentor the newer associates and have them come in and sit in and listen while they're on a call with, you know, somebody like Maureen, and they can absorb and learn, you know, that way, and probably walk out with some work that they didn't have, you know, 20 minutes before that. So that mentoring, and even for staff, it's helpful when we've onboarded, you know, remote staff, and it's hard when you don't have somebody here. When staff have a lot of little questions that come up throughout the day, is how do you do this, or where do I find this? And it's nice to have that training buddy right, you know, across the aisle or something like that, that you can easily reach out to. So you're up to speed a lot quicker that way. But yeah, having the mentorship is key. We just actually had a summer a party last weekend, which was great to see everybody and their family members in a social setting. People really missed that, so that helped get everybody together. We've had a welcome lunch delayed for a new associate after she started in January. We finally had that. And in our office, that's really important. Our people, our culture, we work well that way. And just as a firm as a whole with Ogletree, that's how we're built. We're built on our people. And so we're trying to do that. We do accommodate. Sometimes our meetings are hybrid, where we've got some people in a conference room and other people on Zoom, and so still others just calling in for the audio because that's what works. Maybe they're traveling, maybe they are home with some small children before school starts, or something like that. So we're trying to be, you know, flexible to accommodate that and have people be together, but still in a comfortable, you know, setting, but definitely focusing on that collaboration.
Maureen, does the uncertainty of whether what's next, people going back, people staying remote, doing it part-time, does it present certain opportunities in a global organization, in a stratified office where people are just not coming in at the same times or in different locations? Are there opportunities that we're seeing that you think will kind of remain permanent?
Yeah, you know, the idea of a work day that isn't focused around core hours it's a very interesting concept. We used to have what we call flexibility, and as long as you're in the office from 9 to 3, those core hours, you could kind of come in early and finish early, come in late and finish late. And now I think we are seeing, you know, breaks in the day when it's legitimate to leave, and people who are doing calls at night may actually flip their day and, you know, start very late and go later, even sleep in. The concept might be unheard of, and maybe a lot of them are getting up anyway. But I think there is more opportunity for flexibility, and I think coupled with that is an obligation to be more mindful of our well-being, because we are seeing people working at all ends and through the ends, you know, from really early until very late. And, you know, many people that I talk to say the productivity has gone super high. The meetings have too. And changing the way we interact, I think, is going to be key. Chat's been something that we've taken advantage of. When we talk about the water cooler, chat is kind of the new water cooler. Now, it may not be where you see a ton of people, but you can have everybody going at one time. And it's a very non-intrusive way to ask somebody something quick. So if the culture tolerates that, I think you can allow the virtual environment to make up or alter the ways we do these things that we used to do walking down the hall, bumping into somebody as you were microwaving your lunch or whatever it might have been.
Can I just ask, what does that mean if the culture tolerates it?
Well, you know, somebody made the comment in the chat about the door closed. And, you know, that sends a pretty strong signal, right? Your door's always closed. People aren't going to just stop in and chat. And if our culture wasn't really a culture where doors were closed. And in fact, there's kind of a value that we all embrace that I was brought up in. I've been there 20 plus years. The first call you return when you return to your office was a call to one of your colleagues. That's the culture we have. So we look at helping each other as being our first priority, because if another lawyer helping a client achieves a good result because you've helped them, we all look good. And if you don't help somebody with the experience you have or with the bouncing something off them, well, we all look bad and our credibility is impacted. So the culture we have is really one of embracing and reaching out and not being afraid to ask what might be perceived as the dumb question.
Barbara, all of this tends to bring up the configuration. You alluded to the fact that law firms are thinking about their space, and I'd love to see this. How many people are with organizations that are reconsidering their space needs? Maybe just don't raise your hand, because I think that I called on Sharon because she raised her hand in my poll. So just give a thumbs up, then I know you won't have a question. But I'm just curious if people are having conversations about that. So Mark and Jessica, Chris, I can see that. I guess those folks are from larger organizations, and just thinking about it. You too, Maureen. So the space issue is a real one. And so I would imagine, Barbara, you're getting all kinds of different conversations from a parity standpoint. You know, how do you think universal offices or other space things that often came with the perks of success at firms or even in law departments, how will that change?
Sure. You know, big offices are really kind of a legacy from when attorneys met with clients in their office, and while they still are going to meet with their teams, we have seen a decrease in office size even before the pandemic. And partly it has to do with rising real estate costs, and there is a growing need for less paper storage, although it still exists. And firms are concerned about things like keeping office space separate from more public visitor space. And I think that there's this kind of whole shift starting to happen, because the firms I talk to, they're trying to figure out how to get attorneys out of their offices and out of this kind of siloed mentality. And I think there's a whole shift happening as, you know, as we've learned that we can do this heads down work remotely. The office is kind of morphing into a place for community as opposed to heads down work. And so the kinds of spaces that we're starting to build in law firms have to do with how we can connect people and build on the culture. And there's kind of this concept we talk about. It's me space, individual space, versus we space, shared space. And as we're seeing offices get smaller, that's allowing us to use that and repurpose the square footage that once was dedicated to that me space to create these more collaborative social spaces, cafes, places that allow people to connect. And I really think that this whole kind of firms, and especially partnerships like a law firm, really rely so much on the building of networks and trust with each other. And that only happens when you connect. And I think it happens best when you connect in person.
I want to just pause for a second to see if anybody has any other questions. I think that the chat is kind of quite vibrant here, and I want to just see if there are other questions, or if people want to speak. You know, you can just put on your video and unmute yourself if you have a comment. But I want to just call out to the audience and see if anybody has any questions. All right, fair enough. You know, I have to say that a lot of these discussions relate to the, I don't know, the wonderful aspects of being in person, this sort of, you know, discussion of collaboration. And Barbara, you were just talking about being in this space together, and we space, and, you know, community, you know, all of these other things. But people don't want to come back. People are still reluctant in some respects to come back. And Suzanne, you talked a little bit about how to make people feel comfortable from a safety standpoint, a spacing standpoint. How can people encourage their employees to come back without, I guess, mandating? I guess you could mandate, but make them feel safe in doing so, and kind of return back to this point where, I don't know, it used to be.
You know, it's amazing when when everybody first went remote, you know, and it was this huge big experiment, right? Like kind of going camping or something. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, I don't know, this is going to work. We're going to pack up all this stuff. We're going to take it here, and let's see what happens. And then it just kind of kept going on, and people got really good at it, right? And then they said they really liked it because they could do all these little extra things while they were at home while still working, and people were working more. They were working longer hours even than if they had been in the office. So now you didn't think that up front, but now we have to change that mindset, right? To go back to how everything had been operating for how many, like literally hundreds of years before. And so it's a little bit of a mindset situation, because a lot of people do like it and they want to work remote all the time. But again, the demands of the business do take precedence. Is, you know, we have to meet our clients' needs, and if that involves having people physically in the office, you know, we need to do that. So, you know, the safety environment is key. Before, while things were still a little bit more on lockdown, we had an app that we developed that people would self-certify their symptoms. If they had any symptom of COVID, then they definitely worked remotely, even if they were, say, scheduled to be in the office. So that gave people a little bit of a sense of comfort, because they knew anybody who was physically in the office was symptom-free. You know, we have our policies. You know, we keep everything. Our facility, fortunately, is very wide open, so we're socially distanced within our own space, with offices and really big open areas and 14-foot ceilings and good ventilation. So we're very fortunate in that office configuration that we have. So that helps. You know, keeping things clean. You know, having the sanitation procedures out there, but then, you know, making people again feel welcome and comfortable. Still maintaining some social distancing, even though people are all fully vaccinated and things like that. So we're providing that for them, and also being cognizant of their individual needs. We are somewhat flexible, even though you may be an in-office person. Right now, my staff is remote 1 day a week. They all have a set day. So they're 4 days in the office, 1 day remote. And that may change going forward, we'll see, but we'll still offer probably some type of flexibility, you know, for those positions that are generally in office, recognizing, you know, the need to accommodate that for many reasons. So but again, having people here and interacting, not having closed doors all the time, because then what's the point? Then it's like everybody is still remote if everybody's sitting in their office with their door closed. So we're encouraging that, and people have embraced it.
I haven't actually practiced law in a firm for 15 years, but we would never call it remote. It was just, I'm working from home on Friday, or I'm going to take my calls at home. It wasn't this magical exception or anything like that. Maureen, I'm just curious, do you think there'll be a point where everybody goes back? You've talked about how successful it's been, and I would imagine that has a lot to do with the great leadership that your law department has, and, you know, I have the privilege of knowing some folks on your team. Do you get the sense that whatever's new will be people spending, you know, most of their time in a remote way, or do you think there'll be a point where people will go back and it will be as it was?
I think the jury's out. You know, we've experienced remote, right? Fully remote. And we experienced before this fully in. This hybrid it's a different animal. You know, are people going to have conversations in the office and leave others out, forget to follow up with them? And so you're going to feel like, oh, gee, I can't do my job because I'm not getting all the information I need, or opportunities. somebody mentioned. I think we have to be very intentional if we want it to work, and there's enough business value to incentivize us to make it work. And I think the business value for us is talent. Getting people to come to Minnesota hasn't always been easy, believe it or not. And if this opens up opportunities for us to hire really good talent and let them be where their families are, where there's more a community that they're very happy to remain in, well, then we got to make it equitable, and we have to help our leaders understand how they have to communicate differently with remote teams and remote reportees, and have hard conversations, perhaps not in the office. And one, I think, real important thing is if we bring people into the office other than by choice, like for a meeting or a training or some event, we want to make it meaningful and make it productive and make it positive. I don't think we want to make the office an environment where people don't want to come. So when they come, it's a positive experience. Maybe it's a great brainstorming or strategy session, and that they're equipped to do their job. So we're looking at, what kind of hoteling can we accomplish without duplicating workstations for everybody, and really compressing our space, because we have let go of real estate in order to, be most efficient, because we believe that we won't have people coming back. So, making it all work it's going to be a challenge, and we'll see if the benefits are strong enough.
I see that Paul is back, and I wanted to acknowledge him and see if he has another question.
Well, it's a combination of a question and a comment, because there have been so many fascinating facets of what you guys have been saying. Ari, I would agree with you that over the years, many attorneys have worked remotely, and it was just never a big deal. You don't know if you're at a client in a branch office, you're traveling, so we now have more effective tools to do that. What is different is our approach to the professional staff who support people whose job definitions are changing in ways that a year ago we didn't imagine, and even at the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't imagine. So this all leads me worrying in a different direction. And I look at the comment that Mark just made, which is really sort of endorsing a hybrid model. But as we are looking at the prospect, and again, we're a regional firm, and the challenges we have of bringing people to Boston as opposed to Minneapolis are the cost of living here, because it's almost as obscene as San Francisco or New York. But what I really worry about, we have been moving in a direction for the last few years that more and more of our younger attorneys do not see the role modeling that they want to inspire them to become partners. And in working remotely more of the time, they can get their work done. They're churning out the billable hours. The clients are being taken care of. That's, to me, not the issue. I don't worry about the financial component or the productivity. I worry about two components. I worry about the culture, and culture is fluid. And we are constantly trying to identify what makes us different than any other employer out there, and how do we retain people and encourage people. And part of that is hiring our attorneys and helping them grow into the partners that they were meant to be. But if they don't meet people in person, if they don't have, whether you call it a water cooler connection or the mentoring or the observation or the other things that we talked about, there is no allegiance to our firm. And the next firm that offers them a little bit more money or a little bit more fluidity in where they can work from, they'll be gone. And so it really makes me wonder in terms of the fluidity, where I think people are much more mobile today than they were even 2 or 3 years ago. They could work any place differently, and their aspirations are different. It makes me wonder where the future leaders of the legal profession, private law firms are really where I'm focusing more specifically, because that's where I live. But where the future leaders, the future partners, the future rainmakers are going to be coming from if they don't get that training, which you can really only do in person, and if they don't have an allegiance to the firm that's employing them. So I really just worry longer term about the profession if we continue allowing or encouraging people to be completely remote.
If I can add on to that, Paul, in addition to everything you said too, and you hit on a little bit with rainmaking, it's the business development opportunities too, for especially newer associates to learn and to get out there, in person. It's really hard to develop business remotely, right? A lot of it is you're in person. Now that we're going back to in-person networking events, and it's really great when they can go with a more senior attorney or associate, and you know, kind of the watch and learn, and have a wing person, so to speak, to introduce them to people and help them, because a lot of that is just done in person. And it's all, you know, law firm and clients is a lot about your relationships, and you need to develop those. And that's really hard to do in a totally, you know, remote environment. So that builds on, you know, what your concerns are, Paul, with moving the newer class of attorneys forward within a firm for shareholder status, which you're going to get from client development.
And I think partners need to understand that it is their responsibility to be mentoring and be available. And it's so much an apprenticeship model in the legal industry. And partners need to be aware of the importance of kind of carrying the torch and their legacy. And things are just going to fall apart if that doesn't exist.
I have to say, ironically, I mean, these are great points. I love this conversation, but I interviewed 33 practice group leaders for a report on the state of litigation, the future of litigation, which recently came out. And a lot of those partners talked about the fact that working remotely gave them a much greater opportunity to be mentors. They could invite younger lawyers to remote depositions, whereas if they had to fly across the country, they couldn't have all these people on there. They were less likely to chase someone kind of off a Zoom so that they had to run and catch a train or get to another meeting. There was a level of calm somehow that gave them the chance to get to know people. They'd see someone's dog in the background, ask a question about the dog. They'd hear a baby crying. Oh, I didn't know, you know, maybe that they should know those things, but they didn't. And so, you know, there seemed to be a lot of positives, particularly in the high stress area of litigation. Those are the people I was talking to, that may revert back. So it's funny that we're talking about mentoring and being in person. I have found a lot of people talking about the fact that they were mentoring, giving opportunities to be, you know, for example, if I were, some of the partners told me that if they had a meeting with Maureen's not tolerating, you know, 4 lawyers in a meeting. Certainly she's not paying for that, but she'd have a meeting with you. But she might be okay with a couple of other lawyers on a Zoom call, brainstorming. They're not going to charge. You know, like there was some discussion of that. I wonder how we replicate those opportunities, the wonderful opportunities that have come out of being remote, you know, in an environment where we're struggling to figure out whether we join together or stay apart.
I think it was Maureen's point before, where she said, you know, doing the hybrid model is not easy, and it's going to involve, there's pros and cons, and Maureen had commented on that. It's a good point, Ari.
Yeah, and
Thank you very much.
You know, pulling off of the conversation and Paul's point too about relationship building, I think, you know, planful relationship building can sustain remote relationships for a long time. If we, you know, bring people together, I think in person is important. This is a profession that's built on relationships, credibility, assessing the other person, sussing them up. And what we've done in the old days was we would have a once a year conference where we would bring our law firms, the PCN firms, our kind of special partner firms together. And I remember the, you know, happy hour we had. I met a ton of lawyers there, and those meetings formed in my mind, you know, connection and, you know, relationship, trust, that then, you know, I feel when I reach out to them and I see them on Zoom or we just talk on the phone. Same with clients. When I used to work remotely from my clients, because on our campus, there's big buildings and some of the clients are in a different building. We weren't constantly shuffling back and forth, you know, to get to the clients in person. So once you establish those relationships, including with peers, I think you can build on that until a certain time when you got to go back and have those connections in person. So I do believe there's a way we can create the right balance between in-person relationships and then leveraging, as you said, Ari, some of the benefits that not having to travel places to get work and experience and to join these kinds of events, you know, to get the talent and other interests, experiences in this big group together that might have been a lot harder to do if we tried to make these things in person.
Barbara, given the need for such an array of different needs here, are you seeing any unusual configurations as people are thinking of their space? I interviewed the president of the New York State Trial Lawyers Association several times over the course of the pandemic to try to understand what courts are doing. And he talked about this idea of reconfiguration of the courts in that, making jury rooms larger and, using courtrooms in different ways. Are you seeing any unusual configurations for law firms in their offices?
Actually, yes, it's a really interesting time for me because people are open to thinking about things differently and trying new models. And probably the most interesting is a firm I'm currently working with, which is a global firm. They ran out of space in their New York office, and we had designed their original office. They're a multi-floor firm, and we were merrily going along and kind of using their existing model with the traditional two-size office and formal conference rooms, a little coffee nook. And all of a sudden the pandemic hit, and it really caused everybody to take a step back. And kind of midway through the work from home experience in 2020, and with some young new leadership at the helm of the firm, they did a 180, and the result is we are going to be building out a full floor with no assigned space whatsoever. Instead, it's modeled where there's private zones that include things like glass-fronted offices that are all the same size. They can be reserved for the day. And there's other, conference, huddle rooms, Zoom rooms, things like that for meetings. But then that's balanced by a large open zone. And that open zone, think of it maybe kind of as a cross between like a Starbucks and a very upscale hotel lobby. And it is, has food and coffee and amenities and open booths and lounge seating. And it's intended to provide interaction and collaboration among the attorneys. And it goes with a whole set of new parameters too, like, clean desk policies and providing personal lockers, reservation systems, things like that. On the very far extreme end, another firm is actually doing a fully open plan, no private offices whatsoever. Granted, this firm is in Silicon Valley and they have tech clients as their main practice, but people are thinking very, very differently. And the last thing that is a bit of a phenomena and it's been very successful, I kind of call it the amenity du jour, which is outdoor terrace space. And it is something that's very much in demand by clients of all industries. And it's especially appreciated now that the idea of being able to circulate fresh air through the space.
So basically every law firm is going to be a WeWork.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, there you go. I've summarized the whole discussion, everybody. You've been a great audience. Thank you very much. I want to ask one last question here about incentives. So there's a lot of discussion about incentives for different things going on these days, whether it's coming back, getting a vaccine, there's lots of discussions about incentives. Are incentives effective in terms of encouraging people to return or to return more often or to adhere to a certain schedule? Suzanne, I'll start with you.
Oh, thanks. Incentives. Well, I guess an incentive with you, if you had proof and we had a system for documenting this, that you were fully vaccinated, you didn't have to wear a mask anymore in our common areas. So that was actually a little bit of an incentive for some people when they came back because they were tired of wearing a mask. And if they might have been on the fence about getting vaccinated, that sometimes, gave them a little nudge when they saw pretty much everybody else wasn't wearing a mask and they didn't want to be the only one. So I guess you could call that a little bit of an incentive, or just the incentive of just being being back together again and being able to work like we used to. As much as people have embraced and loved this whole remote working opportunity and experiment, there's a big part of them too that still longed for the way it used to be. Now, and I hate the term new normal, but we're never going back to what we had. So that's what we're trying to establish now, and establish that new workspace that will become the norm, for most people, especially, the younger, newer generation in the workforce who hasn't been in it as long as I have been. So that's going to be more the expectation, and managing that and accommodating that and working with that, as Maureen and Barbara both commented on, with getting talent that you maybe wouldn't have had access to, and retaining that talent, as well, even if it's talent you already have, and working that way.
When I was a junior lawyer, we used to joke that we worked at a lifestyle firm because they gave us bagels on Sunday. And, I just wonder, is there anything that you could offer, especially, I mean, for a lot of the professionals, I don't know what you could possibly offer that would be an incentive to come back, but is there any, Suzanne, I love your optimism, the idea of working together, just like, I just see like people walking in the hall, flowers popping up in firms, ideas, boom, boom, it's amazing. But I mean, other than that, I wonder,
I'm working on getting the keg up again, Ari.
There you go. Milwaukee, that's right. You're an old brewery, your office is in an old brewery. So any thoughts? I would love to hear from any of the other folks who are listening as we close. Like, any thoughts on that? Anything that firms, companies should do? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the office today, Midtown Manhattan, which is busier than it was, but still very quiet. And as I look out over other buildings, they're notably empty. We've been hovering about 10% occupancy. We've announced that we are expecting people back in some form September 13th. But we also recognize that people have been very reluctant to put their toe in the water and get their shoulders under, as it were. And so we've encouraged people by having return to 1133 days. That's the number of our building. Return to 1133 days. Everybody gets a $40 stipend to spend on breakfast or lunch with their colleagues at a local establishment. Our cafeteria hasn't reopened because we're only 10%, and the local businesses are dying. So it's both an incentive to get out there with your friends and colleagues and remember what it was you liked about the firm, as well as a big boost to the local community. I think we probably took over a couple of restaurants. We're also having things like ice cream socials and happy hours in outdoor spaces on those return to 1133 days, so that people really get the idea that they're coming back. We've seen advantages in moving to a much more paperless environment. We've had people come back after being gone for a year. We put dumpsters outside their office. They clean everything that was on their desk, because if they didn't use it for the last year, there's a good solid chance that they don't need it. So we've taken opportunity to refresh our offices. Every attorney now has sit-stand desks, which they're loving, and considerably less storage space. So they are being forced more into a paperless environment. And I think much more is available to them online in terms of firm resources. We are moving largely to a hybrid work environment. It will take more management on everybody's part, and it is role dependent. You can't be in a facilities management position and work from home. But otherwise, we're expecting people back generally 3 days a week, but really to the needs of the business, and flexible as to the other 2 days. There are some people who are here 5 days a week, and some people who are pushing the envelope and don't want to be here even 3 days a week. So management issue in managing teams, making sure that people are around when they're needed. And I think the honor system. So, and I actually think the article that came out, Morgan Stanley, I guess, saying, you have to come back to work. I think even this afternoon as we were on the phone, there's been some critical commentary around that, talking about how much the banks are invested in real estate. And so perhaps there's a hidden agenda there. So like Barbara, I see that we're going to be leasing a lot less space going forward, because people will be working from home and enjoying the flexibility that that brings. You can be home for dinner and then go back to work. So taking time out to exercise during the day. So I think it's good for diversity. It's good for women in the workplace. It's good for people who have families and really want to spend time with their kids. So I think we all need to figure out how to be flexible and at the same time make sure that we're nurturing and teaching our people to the extent we can.
Wow. You win the incentive sweepstakes, Sally King. That was great. Really, really
Ice cream.
interesting. Yeah, that's right. Stand desk. It's awesome. So look, I want to especially thank Suzanne Schwartz, Barbara Dunn, and Maureen Harms for just being part of this. Thanks, of course, to Natalie Kelly and Debbie O'Connell for giving me this chance. The next College of Law Practice Management webinar is on August 3rd. It's at 11 a.m. Central. It's called Closing Firm Client Communication Gaps. As I understand it, a recording of this program will be available tomorrow afternoon, and you'll get a link in your email. And I'm Ari Kaplan, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. Thanks so much for being here today.